safe to say that probably one of the first techniques you learned as a hobbyist was dry brushing. Simple, low effort, and quick as well. What if I told you there are actual ways to elevate this technique? What if I told you that it doesn't have to look dusty and sloppy? Well, today I'm gonna show you some tools and techniques that will allow you to have smoother transition and finishes. In the last 5 to 6 years, new things have been introduced for dry brushing. One is very well received, while the other is a bit controversial, like me. But before diving into that, let's define really quickly what dry brush is and also what you're gonna need. Also, if you want extra tips, consider subscribing to my newsletter. Cat approved. What is dry brushing? Dry brushing is universally recognized a technique where you take a big flat brush, dip it into the paint, remove the excess onto a paper towel, and then apply the paint to your model. Well, it might actually sound weird to somebody, but the brush doesn't have to be totally dry. This is the controversial part. And to be honest, I was totally stunned by the number of people who got really pissed at that notion. More of that later. What do you need? First, you'll need a palette. Wet, dry, same. And well, of course, brushes. Some companies introduced a new form of brush specific for this job. Before that, people were using regular brushes, the big ones they weren't using anymore, or they were a little bit ruined, so they would use that. Artist Opus, I think, was the first company to produce dry brush specific brush. And then other companies started producing them as well. Well, anyways, these brushes are revolutionary for many reasons. The larger brush surface you have at your disposal allows for a better and more cohesive and uniform application. The rounded shapes allows you to take full advantage of the motion that you should be using to dry brush, which is a circular motion. Before Artist Opus, maybe people were using makeup brushes as dry brushes, but using a brush that's made specifically for a single job, it's a whole nother story. After Artist Opus, many other companies started producing their own, and I personally just tried the AK Interactive ones, and they're okay. Artist Opus kindly sent me their dry brush set, and they're amazing, but they are quite a bit expensive. Even though the advanced technique that I'm going to show you doesn't put as much strain on the brush, I want to be free to use my dry brushes without worrying that I will get damaged by how I use them. And it's very cringe-worthy for me doing that when the brushes cost $20. I'm afraid. Wouldn't you? But never mind, just choose whatever you can afford and whatever you like. They're both quite good. Before we talk about that super controversial tool, let's discuss another useful thing that has been introduced very recently, I would say. It's kind of a substitute for the old paper towel. It helps you test and control how much paint you have on your brush before actually applying to your miniature and fuck it up, basically, without any unpleasant surprises. Bet you figured out by now I'm talking about texture palette. Artist Opus, of course, produces its own, but honestly, I personally liked my homemade one better. I am gonna spend hundreds of dollars on my Artist Opus detail brushes, and I'm glad to do so, but I'm not spending any money in things I can basically get for free. For this, you'll need a piece of cardboard and some texture paste, or even some sand and glue. If you are that cheap, I don't need a big surface, because once it's all covered, I'm gonna prime it black as many times as I want, or I can do more of it. I know there are many more options of doing this, like Lila did, putting bits and stuff, but to me, for the purpose that this thing has, sand is enough. You don't need to put your bits in it, I think. That's my opinion. And you know what else you get for free that you can clean with just soapy water? Your hand. The pros are that you can actually feel the level of moisture and the quantity of paint with the great gift of touch. The cons is people are gonna know you play with plastic toys. Now to the controversial item. Like I said, dry brushing doesn't mean the brush is totally dry, like Sahara dry. I really don't know why a bit of moisture is perceived like a mortal sin in the dry brushing world. Well, this tool allows you to add a little bit of moisture on your brush without directly putting it into water. This tool is a moisturizing pad or dampening pad. Guess who puts this in their dry brush set. It's Artist Opus. What a surprise! People who make dry brushes also do moisturizing sponge. Who would have guessed? Who knows where I learned this from? They make dry brush, so I think they know what they're doing. And they also sell the container with the dampening spot for $15 on their website. But again, we can make our own. They're just using a container with some packing foam in it. It's the same material that you use for sponging. It's likely you have plenty of the stuff if you're buying any kind of bigger miniatures. Otherwise, you can get it on Amazon. Here, I'm just cutting it to size to put it in the container I already have. You can just use any container. The container doesn't add up anything to the technique. But yeah, cutty, measuring, and there you have it. So far I explained what dry brushing is, and I talked about 2 revolutionary tools for the job. Up next is how do you use these tools to achieve smoother finishes, and I'm gonna explain step by step the technique I use to achieve this. But before I get into this, I want to tell you one more thing I learned in my 20 years of dry brushing. Like any other technique, dry brushing has different levels that require different skills and training as well. These levels are distinguished by 3 main factors. 1, how textured versus how flat the surface is, how much paint you have on your brush, and finally, how big or how small the surface is. And finally, we come to the thing that you actually wanted to hear, hopefully. Even here, it is gonna be controversial because I'm gonna be using the dry brush tool in a slightly different way, and people are gonna say I'm not dry brushing, but fact is that you can mix and match. People are gonna be mad. I know. To be honest, this took me quite a few attempts to do kinda right, but I think it has a lot of potential and of course a little bit of a learning curve, but I think it's worth it. Let's jump into it and see if I can explain it to you. Let's start, shall we? I kinda always tap the brush on my hand before using the texture palette so I can actually feel the moisture on my skin. Like I said, the more paint you have on your brush, the harder it is. You can see in this application I started with a little bit too much paint. But no worries, I can fix that later. Remember, this was my 3rd attempt, so that should tell you something about the learning curve of this technique. I'm working my way around the figure and I'm using the brush in a very specific way. I'm dry brushing with that circular motion we always want with dry brushing, but at the same time, sometimes I would add a little bit of moisture so I can revive a little bit that dry paint, and this way I'm able to blend it a little bit better using again that circular motion and try not to leave any weird streaks. The other thing that I do with using this technique is stippling. When I use slightly wetter paint on the surface, I usually stipple it and then I feather and blend it out using that circular motion. It kinda reminds me of oil paint techniques, but with acrylics, which is harder. But you can see here it's not super uniform. It's a learning curve because at the end of the day it's an advanced technique, but it's way less hard than blending with layering and glazing on such a huge surface, or even using an airbrush, if you're me. I work my way around the bike just trying to softly smoothing everything out. If you notice, there is a blob of paint that's out of place in the lower part of the bike, but it's all good because now I can show you how to fix it. So I'm gonna take some black, stipple it in the recesses where I have my sloppy area I wanna cover. Then I tap the excess off on my texture palette and proceed to blend with the same motion from before. Please note here I have more paint on the brush. When that happens, everything is more risky because I have to be really quick at blending the wet color. Like you can see though, I also use my finger, so it's not like a super precise work. Tapping and stippling with this circle shaped brush really helps with blending in a way more accessible way, I think. On the upper part of the bike there are some grooves, and sorry to say, but here the limitation we talked about before applies. Smaller surfaces are harder because they require us to change brush, and we don't want to do that. Just saying it is not gonna look as good. But anyway, I do the same thing, layering up using a nice turquoise, always stomping on my hand and using my palette. Here you can clearly see the difference between the larger area and the area with the grooves. The pointed part of the bike just looks better and smoother. Proselytes, it's the same as before. I'm pretty happy with the smoothness I've achieved, even though the smaller upper part could be way better, but can't have everything right. So this is the technique. The controversy is that if you can actually call this dry brushing. For me, it's a yes, because the quantity of moisture still stays in the area where it belongs to dry brush. What do you think? Having said that, a question arises in my head. Is this better than airbrushing? Is this easier, even given the slight learning curve that I experienced? Is it less expensive and less of an hassle to clean and store? I'm gonna let you answer that. And now that you unlock the full potential of what a dry brush can do, you're just one step away to have smooth transition throughout your whole army. But still, you have one problem. Like I said, dry brush is good for big and textured surfaces, but not as much with small surfaces. You need to know how to blend. And if you don't learn this, you're gonna be stuck painting big models for the rest of your days. Don't worry, I got your back, because I've got the video right here. Just click it. See you there.